Yeah.
All right. I am indeed recording. So we met in Chino briefly,
Yep.
but even in a smaller conference like Chino, there's not always able to catch up with everyone. So, and I know a little bit, a little bit about what you're doing now from Brian.
Yeah.
So, well, why don't you bring me up to speed?
Yeah. So, um, Brian and I became good friends in pharmacy school. So we're both pharmacists. That's our training and our background. And I know you like to ask people about their home, what was like life like at home. We can get into that, but we'll start there. So we graduated from Loma Linda University in Southern California, and we both came from um, public school in the past. He had went to a Seventh-day Adventist undergraduate institution. I did not. I went to public school all the way. He did public school just in like K through 12. Um, and yeah, we ended up being involved in ministry there during our time. We would have a lot of very um, in-depth discussions about the state of our church and our community. And
So, Brian grew up Seventh-day Adventist. What kind of church did you grow up in?
same,
Oh, same. Okay.
same, yeah, yeah. So we both grew up in that space, and so we're at a Seventh-day Adventist institution, right, as well. And for me, it was the first time being, attending a Seventh-day Adventist institution. He had attended one in undergrad, and well, he introduced me to Tim Keller. Um, and I mean, me and Brian, we listened to Tim Keller sermons like every day for 2, 3 years, and it was it was transformative in many ways. And I've heard you talk about that on your channel for a little bit about your experience with probably way before we were watching him.
I
But
found him in 2006.
okay, yeah, so we were like 20. This is probably 2014, 2015.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so we started in 2013, graduated in 2017. So all during that period. So interestingly enough, during that time, we'd been involved in ministry and just kind of looking at how we could integrate our faith into our work, right? And I think the mission of Loma Linda University is one of the greatest missions I've ever heard. It's to continue the teaching and healing ministry of Jesus Christ, and I fully believe that's why I was there. Why I was drawn to the university, everything I did with that in mind. Um, and like, what does that look like? In today's society where everything is industrialized, healthcare is fee for service, and Loma Linda started as a sanitarium, and there's like all of this other stuff that ended up happening in medicine. And so like, okay, what does that look like? And what are the greatest needs that we could meet in our community? And for me, I actually, started out that journey going on medical mission trips, like short-term ones, and looking at healthcare needs in other countries. So I went to Romania, a small village there. Um, had great mentors that joined along in that journey. Went to, let's see, I went to Belize, Brazil, Mexico, and really was kind of awestruck at the poverty. I mean, I grew up in Pennsylvania, Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. That's my hometown. Um, in the suburbs, my whole family's back there. My mother's family's from Wilkes-Barre, Scranton area, so we're coal regioners. And I know you grew up in New Jersey or
Yep.
New Jersey a lot growing up, so similar area. And so yeah, for me, it was kind of a whole different world, going into other countries, and had no family that was in medical or healthcare. Um, so I was like kind of the first generation in my family to do anything in healthcare, and so that was kind of an unbelievable experience for me to realize like, oh, people like don't have access to this stuff, you know. Um, and then I started getting involved in San Bernardino right here, right across the 10 freeway from Loma Linda, and realized, oh wait, people don't have access here either. you know? And, I did some reading on, some of the cons of short-term mission trips and said, I think if I'm gonna do that, I need to live there. That was kind of my sentiment at the time. And so I said, well, I don't know if I'm gonna do that. So I, decided to find opportunities here to improve the access to healthcare. And a lot of that came from Keller, just like really
Yep.
typical Christianity,
Yep. Yep.
Um, and so a lot of that came from there. And at the same time, there was frustration because it's like, as we were listening to Keller, it was like, well, where are the intellectuals in our church? And we're talking about a place where there's medical, dental, farm. I mean, we're talking like where you would think you would find folks. And it was pretty discouraging at the time. And we had sought out some folks and had some other friends that we had met, which was great. But it was kind of frustrating, right? To feel like just the institution had drifted a bit from its, at least that particular institution, from that mission. And so we got into books like Mission Drift, which is an amazing book by a couple Christian uh, church planters talking about the YMCA and Yale and Harvard and how organizations drift from their mission. And it was quite a transformative time for me as not only learning how to become a practitioner, but really solidifying what faith and practice look like for us. And so we had a vision to build a space, a one-stop shop for people's needs. Um, a library, a church, a health clinic, after-school programs. Like, how could we do that? And as healthcare professionals, we thought, well, we'd start there. And so I pursued residency training. So I did UCSD for a year and then went to Richmond, Virginia. So I saw like two separate populations. And so in pharmacy, just to kind of catch you up to speed briefly on maybe what clinical pharmacists do in that setting. So I work in I was trained in primary care. So in areas where there's provider shortages, or places where pharmacist licenses can practice to where you're actually prescribing therapy, adjusting medications, ordering labs, evaluating those labs, following up with patients, doing all the diet and lifestyle modifications. That was what I was trained in for 2 years in those various settings, which kind of aligned with what I was doing on those medical mission trips and in San Bernardino, and kind of all really became a practitioner in that world. And when I was done with that, I said I want to start a nonprofit, and that's what we did. And
What year did you start?
2019.
Wow.
Yeah.
Of course, in 2019, it was just another year. You didn't know what 2020 was going to be.
That's exactly right. And yeah, 2019, we incorporated. In 2020, the pandemic just shut down the original plan.
Yeah.
But then we realized that we started getting reached out to, like, hey, we need we need compliance at homeless shelters.
Yeah.
Like, people were like freaking out.
Yeah.
Should we close the shelters down? Should we keep them open?
Yeah.
How do we sanitize the place? How does COVID spread? I mean, we're talking before COVID even hit California.
Yeah. Yeah. Of course, everybody's sleeping outside. So it's like, you're gonna bring him inside? Really? Is that what you want to
do? And that's where I know, listening to you, your interactions with folks, and I just that we can get into that later in the conversation. But I always felt connected to how you would talk about the homeless population, and like I totally resonate with the challenges. And I've heard a video you did on what does a disorder mean? I very much have I have a lot to say about things like that, because you actually talk to them and you ask them questions and you're like, these people are saying more than most people are saying.
They are.
And they have books on them, and the books are books that most people would never touch. And I'm like, there's something here.
Yeah.
And I think they're speaking to us in a way that we need in society. And so that's what we're figuring out now is how to balance that. But anyway, going back to the 2020, it was, we need support in these shelters. And yeah, we, from the beginning to even now, are, continuing to, provide those, testing on a regular basis, if not so much anymore, but then testing all the protocols, policies, and procedures, bringing staff on site, quarantining people. Some shelters are, they have um, bunk beds, others are non-congregate. So it's like different protocols for different locations. And that's really how we, became a trusted entity in the community and the city of Victorville. Actually, we started overseeing facilities there. Um, and if you know much about Victorville or what's called the high desert, it's split between the San Bernardino Mountains. So you're talking like, LA and San Bernardino, Riverside are all south of Big Bear.
Right.
And you go on the other side of Big Bear and you're in they call it the high desert. And so the
Oh,
only
yeah. That's a totally different place.
totally different place. Yeah. Yeah.
That's a California a lot of people don't know.
Yes.
It's a totally different world than, I mean, people first think of beach, Baywatch. It's like, okay, there's a little sliver of California. It's just a sliver.
Yeah.
And then they think of LA. It's okay, there's another thing. And then they think of the Bay Area. Oh, there's another. If they go a little bit deeper, they might think of the Central Valley and
Right.
some of these places like the Central Valley, like bases that were ag and are sort of urbanizing. It's like, okay. But then you go to places like Victorville or Siskiyou County, and it's just like,
Yeah.
in some ways, it has more in common with Nevada than what people think of as California.
Exactly. And most people around here would say, "Oh, well, I passed out on my way to Vegas." That's
Yep.
and it's a unique community because most people that live there work down in the valley, but there's the 15 freeway. The only way to get, and the traffic is awful. So people are sitting in 2 hours of traffic to get 40 minutes away. I mean, it's just out of control. And I mean, the health effects that has alone on the community. People aren't spending time with their families. I mean, just you look at again, domicide, right?
Yeah.
Like it's it's a it's baked into the challenges that this community has, and is why the homelessness crisis, in many ways, has revealed itself in that particular community. So, yeah, we started getting involved in a more official way with the city, and they said, "Hey, what do we need to do here?" And so we were like, "Well, do you want to build a facility? Is there any funding for that?" And so they got funding from the state,
Yeah.
applied,
Yeah.
and built this like state of the art,
Yeah.
4.5 acre facility, 170 beds, cafeteria, dog kennel, medical clinic on site. We applied for the RFP, and so we're providing services there, and it's challenging. But we believe that the work we're doing there is making a huge difference. And maybe not in the way that everyone wants. Like, are you getting people into housing? Like that's the outcome. That's the end everyone wants to know, right? And in some ways we are. People are
Yeah.
getting, but it's what we're doing along the way for the folks that are in and out of the facility. It's a low barrier, so people are coming in, pretty loaded, in some cases. Other people have untreated mental health disorders. And so we're, providing services to a spectrum of folks. And um, so as you can imagine, all of the grants and all of the reporting and all of that gets
Who,
complicated.
who do you and Brian do that work, or do you have someone that's
Yeah,
like likes that kind of work? Because for me, I'd be living in there with them at that point because I would have gone round the bend if I had to deal with these government agencies.
yeah, it was so, a year ago, we had 5 employees. So in terms of administration, it was mostly me. with a few consultants and stuff. And I know, yeah, we use some consultants, and then now we have 40 employees. So that was a whole nother launch.
There's a whole nother issue.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
People wonder why I stay in a small church and why I don't start Estuary Inc. and all of that. This is the reason, because it's like, I don't want to manage all that stuff.
Yeah. And I can tell you that I think the only reason I was able to do it is because I did it started in my 20s. I like, even now at 32, I'm like, man, if I had started this today, I don't know if I'd make it. And I don't have any family. Like, I don't have a wife or kids, or, like, so I don't even think I could have made it. I started all this in my 20s, and, now we're here. And so it becomes more doable. But like you said, um, yeah, we have a team now, but initially it was all me and some consultants. Brian is our board president, so he functions in that role, and I function in kind of the day-to-day operations role. Um, and so yeah, but now we have a team, and the team is great. We have an amazing team, people that really fit the mission and the culture that we're looking for, people that care about
Yeah.
people. There's a lot of,
Yeah.
you know, people get jaded in any field, as you know, but healthcare and social services is a tough one for this
Well,
population. So
especially with a population like that,
yeah,
because as you said, so the idea through the political lens, and there's been massive, so I live in Sacramento, so we get all the political news. I mean, there's been massive amounts of money dedicated to homelessness. That's this little box we have,
yeah,
which of course means dozens of different things.
uh-huh.
And so there's massive amounts of money. So, okay. And so then you ask the impossible, can you build a facility? Yeah, we'll build a facility, big, beautiful facility. Now you got to run that sucker.
Mhm.
And you think, well, people think that, okay, they're on the street because they don't have services. So we'll make a big box, we'll give services, and then they go in here like little bits of raw material, and we stamp them into middle class citizenry, California style, and we send them out and we put them in another box called either rent or mortgage attached to job and family. And it's like, yeah, you're not talking about human beings.
No, I um, and you bring up a whole concept of, well, what is civilization, right?
Yeah, you got to go that far down in the stack to begin to talk about these issues. You're exactly right.
Yeah, it's and that's where if you focus on that part, it's impossible. So like you said, you have to accept some assumptions and accept some gray area, and I mean, we have seniors that, like, their social security is like 900 a month, and so what, they may be able to afford 500 a month in rent. Okay, that's with four other people, and they're 60 some years old,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
And people are like, well, where are you moving these people to?
Yeah. Yeah. Show me the $500 a month housing, please.
Yeah.
That doesn't look like a shared room in a board and care in, a Victorville or Sacramento.
Yeah.
Because let me tell you, I know plenty of people on disability who they're spending $800 a month for 2 or 3 or 4 in a bedroom with 2 cheapest meals a day.
Yeah.
And then they have another 100 or 200 beyond that has to cover everything else.
Yep.
That's the picture. So a senior at $500 a month that doesn't have an intact family network where they can maybe live in a home with someone, yada, 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 yada. It's like, yeah, you know, that all those van life videos where you see the Arizona desert of people living in cars from the 1990s. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's $500 a month Social Security right there. And find someone who can, you know, who will accept your mail. That's what that looks like. And so a
yeah,
place like Victorville, that's just right next door to the van life, the senior van life in Arizona.
yeah. And the other challenge too is because Victorville is so expansive, the area with desert, people are just living on other people's property in mobile homes, and they're like, "Well, I'm not homeless." It's like, no, you're not. But what does the city think about that? The city says, well, you can't live on this property. And like you said, the political climate is such that, well, cities need businesses in their community to run, to operate. They want, you know, if you want businesses to come in, and have to have inviting streets, right? Without people sleeping on the side of them, without,
Without that car that's just 100 feet from me that has a little woman who's been living in it for the last month. And she was just smart enough to put this next to a church, not my church, but the church across the street, and between another church and a bunch of other businesses that are just neglectful enough, they're not going to call code enforcement, because if she parked another 100 feet into the neighborhood, they would be on code enforcement and getting that car out of there.
yeah,
So, yep, we are on the same page, my friend.
yeah, and code enforcement is a whole nother thing to talk about, which, you know, we work closely with, and it's they they have a code to enforce that is for, in many ways, the betterment of most of the citizens, you know?
Yep.
But then again, like you're saying, it's like, well, what can we do for these folks? And it tends to be that, well, we want to do low barrier shelters because we want people off the street, and we want you to figure out how to work with them in the meantime, right?
Yep.
And that's the space that we're in. And as long as that's happening, you know, the cities that you work with are like, hey, we're happy that the streets look better. And that's really all they care about, you
Yes,
know?
it is. Because if the streets look worse, guess who else loses their jobs? They will be voted out.
Yes.
It doesn't matter if you're Democrat or Republican. If the streets look like some of the streets are looking around here, you are going to get your butt voted out. And if
Yes.
there's anything politicians are focused on, it's keeping their jobs. And yeah, hey, we all like to keep our jobs. I'm not saying anything against them. I understand. It's how the system works.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh man.
That's the landscape, if you know, if I could paint it. And so as you can imagine, there's pressures from all angles. And so and so city says, "Oh, we like your shiny toy. We want one here." And they have no idea what it means, you know? They just know they have a problem, and they want someone who has some idea of how to solve it to come in and support them.
Right.
So, and by the way, fundraising for these kind of things isn't exactly the most attractive for people with deep pockets, you know? Um, it's heavily grant, you know,
Yep.
and the good thing is that this is kind of where things are starting to become revolutionized in a better way. To talk on the positive side is, which is what I was really focused on in school, is like, well, how can we get health plans to pay for these services? And well, now they do. So now housing and healthcare, housing is a social determinant of health. So, okay, well, the health plans are realizing, well, if we don't address housing, then our costs are going to go through the roof because all of our folks are living in the emergency department,
That's right.
clogging up that system.
Yep.
Readmission rates, they get dinged crazy for by CMS, right?
Yep.
So basically, we get paid to house that person in a bed for up to 90 days and
Yep.
potentially even up to longer.
Yep.
So now that with the training that we've had, says, okay, well, how can we hire the most skilled staff to like support these clients? So we have nurse practitioners, marriage and family therapists, substance use disorder counselors, physicians, registered nurses, LVNs, MAs, pharmacists, occupational therapists. It's the full spectrum of folks. And so that's the upside, is that things are changing in that direction as far as how they're funded.
Yep.
So what we're doing is we're saying, well, we can provide a level of service that is, in line with the need, right? For a lower cost, because we can subsidize the operations of these facilities with our revenue that we get from the health plans. And like you're saying, all of this funding that's getting funneled from Sacramento to all over the state. So that is kind of also why we're, being asked by all these different areas, like, well, how are you doing this? And they find out, well, wait, the city's not paying you. And it's like, whoa, like, what's this new model? And so, yeah, the vision takes you somewhere and you don't know where it's taking you. And the Lord is working in a way that that we can't possibly imagine along the journey, and who he's forming us to be along that process.
Yeah.
And so that's been the journey over the past, honestly, 6-7 years now.
Yeah.
It's just focused on this one thing,
Yeah. But
and
it is hard. I mean, it's hard on you, it's hard on Brian, it's hard on others that share your ministry, because we like clean narratives
yes,
where and sometimes that happens, and it does. Sometimes it happens. There are those individuals that came in there and they were a mess and they got some support, and maybe the gospel got a hold of them, and so they were not only able to sort of get some of the psychological and economic things, but they also got some spiritual things which gave them some strength, and then they found a relationship and they got a job, and they're now they're no longer sort of in your care, but then maybe they're working with an AA group, or they're in a church over there, and they're moving on up, and there are those stories,
yes,
but there are also the other stories,
yeah, and
and those are the ones
yeah,
that you carry.
yeah, and the unfortunate thing is there's more of those stories, a
A
lot,
lot more.
a lot more, a lot more, and it is true. It's what's carried, and you go to something like a ribbon cutting, and all you can do is try to, um, like what I try to do is really focus on the meaning behind all of it, because the shiny objects really capture people, and the moments that capture people. And so, well, this is going to be the cleanest, smoothest thing that's ever been done.
Yep. Yep.
And
This is the answer. Here it is. It's the
yes,
silver bullet right there. We cracked the code. We figured it out. And then newspapers come from Los Angeles and the
yes,
Imperial Valley, and they take pictures and they talk to you. And it's like, oh, we have the answer to homelessness in California. Not so much.
yeah,
Doesn't mean what we're doing is bad. Doesn't mean it never works. Doesn't mean any of those things, but it's still a fight.
it's a fight. It's a fight, and I don't know if we have. I'm sure we'll end up in future discussions, but I often talk to my staff and I say, I know everyone uses the phrase, if you go on the internet and you read like who's doing what, it's like everyone's saying they want to end homelessness. I'm like, man, but if you don't say it, you seem like someone who doesn't believe that people can be changed. So, like you said, people struggle with the collective versus the individual,
Yeah.
and being able to appreciate the nuances between the collective and the individual. And so, I just tell my staff, guys, just focus on each individual. If you come into this space thinking that 150 of the 150 are going to move forward, um, but how do you do that without entering into nihilism? And to me, that is where the argument for the gospel and for Christianity and for um, if I can do something you've done many times,
Oh, you get the paperback version.
yes, you know, if we can see that the story is of history has never been clean, it's never been all or nothing. The pendulum is always swinging. Um, but what matters is that we are made in the image of God.
Yeah.
Um, that's what we share with our staff, and I think it does, that seed gives people the hope,
Yeah.
um, not just for them, for the clients, but for themselves, who many of which um, have a history,
Yeah.
and that's so that's where it all, um, that's kind of where we land things in terms of how we cope with this every day,
Yeah.
Um, so so yeah, that's what it's been like, and very fortunate to actually attend a church that supports our organization. One of our board members is the pastor of that church, um, and so it's been a great experience having support from our faith community in this. Because like you alluded to, this is a ministry. It's just a ministry that has a 501c3 and a non-church 501c3 and a operational budget and employees and all this other stuff. But
Yeah. Yeah.
I really do treat it as a ministry as much as we possibly can.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
Balance.
Brian's the same way. I mean, so some people might, well, how did people are always, how did you get a rando slot? Well, I'll tell you, first Brian flies up and he's on the Freddie and Paul show, and then he drives up it's like, yeah, I'm not gonna turn this guy's gonna come all the way to Sacramento and ask for a slot on the Freddie and Paul show, or yes, yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the thing too. So I'm glad I got to share about a little bit about me, and maybe I could share a little bit about how I got here.
Yes.
Um, uh, because I think that along this journey of, really since 2015, 2016, it's been like I was saying, like, where are the folks having these conversations?
Mm,
And it's crazy timing, because as we were saying, where are the intellectuals? Jordan Peterson is sweeping all these people up that never went to church into the Genesis series, and we're like, what? This is crazy, you know? And so we're in on the Jordan Peterson thing, and we're watching, and we're like, yeah, this is. I mean, how else will these types of folks enter this space? Because Brian and I grew up in church our whole life,
yeah.
and we see that church tends to attract certain types of people.
Yeah.
And as you've discussed, across Protestantism and Catholicism and Orthodoxy, it tends to attract certain types of people, even each to their own tribe.
Yeah.
And so, that's where we're like, okay, well, church isn't just for those people, though.
No.
So, what about other people who maybe have a similar thought pattern as us, but weren't immersed in this our whole life and have kind of embraced it in a different way? And so, where are those people? And so, well, we're watching Jordan Peterson pretty closely too.
Yeah.
We're like, what's he up to?
Yeah.
And next thing you know, someone says, hey, there's a guy named Paul Vanderklay, and he's a pastor, and he's talking about Jordan Peterson. And this was, I don't even know, this was 2019. I think this was like 2019, 2020. I think
Yeah.
you had like 2K subscribers or something. And so one of the first videos I watched um, was the video you did, and you may have done a series of them, but it was a video that you did on bearing the cross.
Hmm.
And you actually held the book up like this. If you want to make change, read a book. You said that. It was one of the most animated I've seen you in terms of
Hmm.
like seriousness on the
Yeah.
channel. And I resonated with that because I also, especially during that time, that was a
Yeah.
wild time.
Yeah.
Um, Politically, culturally, oh my gosh, it was so tumultuous. And I said, you know what? Like, it gave me a sense that, like, hey, there are others in the spirit, like Elijah, right? Where are they? Where is everyone? You just don't, Lord says, don't you know I have others.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
That was the experience. And
Mm.
so ever since then, and as you can imagine, I've been doing a lot of things, but I've always had a draw towards the philosophy and the conversation. It's just, I feel like I haven't had time.
Yeah.
And so I don't comment much. I don't, I just listen and I engage that way.
Yeah.
And from that point, doing this, listening to the Sunday sermon version, and the Romans Sunday school has been great as well. And then I'll dive in. I really watch Randos, to be honest with you. But I will catch commentary you're doing on other videos. And I think what it's been for me is a space that um, where I see that someone is not lost in the sauce. I think like I really see people getting lost in the sauce,
Yeah.
and I'm like, man, um, I mean, as you talk about all the time, it's like if you want to grow a big channel, there's a lot of ways to do it. It's not really that complicated. It's just a formula.
Yeah. Yeah.
Same with an organization. If you want to grow something into being, it's just, well, what's the ethos of this going to be, right? Um, so I've appreciated your commitment to your mission, which is collecting um, folks who collecting and nurturing folks who don't have another space. And I don't want to speak for you, but I feel like that's what I've seen. And that your commitment to that is even how I'm here. Because you could have exploded to a point where this conversation couldn't happen. Truly, that's how it works.
Yeah.
That is,
I don't know if it would work that way for me or this channel.
well, I,
I regularly sabotage my own success.
but and that's I accept that. I accept that. But I do really see your commitment to that, and um your willingness to fill in the gaps. And I think when it was the most evident to me was at Chino, and you did a very you know the quest for a spiritual home, and you did a very Keller-esque. What are the desires? What are we all seeking for?
Yeah.
And to then hear the subsequent speakers, and I think, and if I can be very honest, I could say that oftentimes when it seems like the extremely, extremely intelligent of the folks on TLC are in the space are are having trouble putting a certain piece together. I see you working on filling it.
Mm,
And I think the conversation that was most evident of that was yours with John Vervaeke
mm,
on stage. And he was like, Paul, you said that was the greatest thing you ever said. And I'm thinking to myself, this is what he's talking about all the time. Like this is like, I'm like, John, you're like brilliant. You're right. You're brilliant, but like this is what this guy is doing the whole time. This is Paul's role in the space. And to see you do that out of someone who, I'm younger, so I'm a little bit more. I want to be more abrasive with people and say like, this is what it is. Like seeing how you've worked with folks and talked with folks, even folks that are more well known than yourself, and the conversations you've had with them, and the journey that you're as a pastor on to support people who are maybe really good at defining what a home is, for example, but may not know that they're in a home, or that they can be, that they themselves are hospitable, or all of those things that really humanize those folks who are in this space. Oftentimes, because of their intellect, may not feel that. Those were some memorable moments. Those were some memorable moments for me along the journey. Um, and yeah, so I'll pause there and give you a chance to respond. But then I'd be happy to share a little bit about how I got here.
yeah, I'd like
Um,
to know your story.
yeah. Um, so we'll start at the end. Again, quest for a spiritual home. Um, John Vervaeke, Prospect and Refuge. I've been it's a tremendously um, it's a tremendous illustration for how human beings over time have found their place, um, with a fire being the center of that home, right? And intimacy that comes from that warmth, and how we position ourselves. Um, I've I found as a kid growing up, my parents split when I was 3.
Mm,
Um, I have an older sister who's 9 years older than me, half sister.
mm,
My mother was married before, had my sister, married my father, had me, and then there was another split. And so I remember um, early on in my childhood bouncing around between the two, my
mm,
and out AA and NA. So you know they had struggled with that throughout my childhood,
mm-hmm.
and so um, I saw a lot, experienced a lot of
Yeah.
situations that, um, and I feel very fortunate that I I don't think I ever experienced like a truly um, you know uh, physically traumatic situation.
Mm-hmm.
There were a lot of close calls.
Mm-hmm.
Um, my father got a DUI when I was in the car. Uh,
Mm,
my mother, not, in fourth grade, and I'm not at, she wasn't home at midnight when I'm trying to get to bed, things like that, going to neighbors' houses and asking if
ah,
I stay over, and I'm 8 years old. So I I became very independent thinker, um, really struggled with authority as a kid.
yeah.
I
That's as would be reasonable given the functionality of the authorities in your life, your primary authorities.
Yeah, yeah. So I struggled with behaving in school when I was young, but I, but my grades were never a problem. So I, was always, they thought I was too bored and they wanted to jump grades and all this other stuff. And, you know, I just, ADHD became a thing at that time. And does he have ADHD? And maybe, but, again, there's other things going on that no
Yeah.
one really knew about.
Yeah.
And I didn't really share it
Yeah.
either.
Well, you're a
I,
kid. Well, you're going to say, "Oh, the chaos in my behavior is due to the chaotic situation that I'm being raised in right now." Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. The kid's going to say that.
yeah. So a situation happened um, in when I was in tenth when I was 10, where um, my mother kind of said, "Hey, I don't want to raise you anymore. I want you to go with your dad." And so and now we bring in the hero of my entire story, which is my grandfather. Um, my grandfather was a truck driver. Drove to Jersey and New York City every day, drove back to Harrisburg. Um, he, at this point, was old, obviously older, so he taught at a Vo-Tech school, CDL. He was a CDL trainer. So Pops pulls up in a school bus that he was using to train the guys and picks me up. And, I hang out with him for the day and then I go with my dad. And it was at that point where my aunt and uncle said, "Hey, to my dad, if you don't get it together, we're going to take custody of Shawn." And so I was, 12 and under was kind of just in this very chaotic space with family being told by family that my parents had these issues. "Hey, let us know if you see anything." Me not telling them and hiding it because I just wanted normalcy. So I was very much an adult by early, by 10, 12 years old in terms of decision making and like, maturity. I mean, I was not really involved in the stuff my friends were involved in. But I was an athlete. I was high school football, high school basketball, played football in college. Like I was in the crowd, right? And but was very different than the folks that I grew up with in that respect because when they were wanting to go drink, I was like, "Oh, you guys have no idea what
You want to do that? I know where that goes.
I know where
Not
that
an attractive thing.
no." And I just didn't as from a young age the drinking, the drugs, even the I didn't vibe with it. I thought I don't want to be anything like my parents. Maybe I have this, everyone addictive qualities and all this stuff that we know is partially, but it's a mixed bag.
Right. Kids worry because of course they navigate according to what they see in their parents. So they're just intuitive, not consciously intuitive, assuming when I'm my parents' age, that will be me.
Yeah, yeah,
But of course, you're a kid. You can't say it. I mean, you don't know it, but oh gosh, it is so hard.
yeah. It was a tough childhood. Um, but and to kind of rewind a little further, we were like, well, weren't your parents in church? It's like, well, so my grandfather, my mom's side, okay, her family was Catholic, Italian Catholic from Wilkes-Barre, Scranton, right? Grandfather was in World War II. He was in the FAA. He was an inspector for like planes, Air Force planes. So he moved to Harrisburg, right? And so they were Catholic, and my dad was raised with my grandfather on my dad's side. Kind of going to church every once in a while, not really engaged, and so it really all changed for my grandfather, and he has since passed 2 years ago. But he died at 86. He was the head elder of his church for years and years. When there wasn't a pastor, right? He was the pastor, and this is actually a pretty big church. So Harrisburg's first Seventh-day Adventist church. So one of the bigger churches in the conference in the state, because it's in the capital. So
Yeah.
pretty large church, a lot of kids at the time. So a good spectrum of folks, and he converted to Seventh Day Adventist when he was baptized in the church when he was like 50. But before that, he was a rough and tumble guy. He was a truck driver. Something happened where he really made a big mistake and realized that he could have been basically put into prison for the mistake, and he was not charged and by that person, and realized, like, what am I doing with my life? Basically, I mean, that's his story. And he, for like 5 years, just while he was driving, listened to audio tapes, went to different churches, and that was the church that he gravitated towards.
Yeah.
He, gravitated towards the idea of the Saturday Sabbath.
Yeah.
He was a marathoner, so he was very health conscious.
Oh,
So like the vegetarian, the no
yeah.
alcohol,
Yep.
like all of that, and he knew his son was an alcoholic, so he was like,
Yep.
like these things just kind of resonated with him.
Yep. Yep.
So so that was the place where he found home, and so me and my cousins would go to church with him without our parents.
Okay.
And so was I raised in a Christian home? Yes and no.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes and no.
Yeah.
Um, and so while my parents were struggling with all of this,
Yeah.
I was hanging out with my grandpa, going to church,
Yeah.
hanging out with people in church.
Yeah.
My grandfather would go do communion for people who couldn't make it. We'd visit people in the hospitals.
Yeah.
I mean, like everything I'm doing now is because I've seen servant leadership work,
Yep. Yep.
you
Yep.
know, and
Yep.
from someone who was not, a, a look down your nose Christian, a legalist, you know,
Yep.
the man cared for people. And when he died at 86, had a church full, standing room only funeral
Yep.
with with his with me as his oldest grandson,
Yeah.
and his um his youth group kids that are now pastors,
Yeah. Yeah.
leading the service,
Yeah. Those eulogy virtues, and a eulogy story.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I told that story actually at the funeral
Yeah.
about who he was to me
Yeah.
and what he did for me,
Yeah.
and how who I am is most in part of, I mean, we live 5 miles apart. I mean, I grew up, I hung out with him all the time, even as in high school, going over to his house on weeknights, hanging out, eating food.
Yeah.
We went to lunch every Sunday,
Yeah.
every Sunday.
Yeah.
Went to the sub shop down the street, and ate subs and fries and hung out and watched football the rest of the day, or NASCAR or something.
Yeah.
I had a really amazing relationship with him. And then my dad was able to clean himself up, and I lived with my dad for all of the rest of my upbringing, and great supportive aunts and uncles and cousins, and
Yeah.
so life became more normal
Yeah.
after that time.
Yeah.
But when you talk about when this concept of domicide comes up, I mean, there's a reason I'm working with homeless people.
Yeah.
I know how close it could have been. The grace of God. Um, what else can explain? I wasn't chosen to be born to my grandfather's family.
Yeah.
Um, it was by the grace of God that I did not become, because that was a trajectory. I didn't like authority. I was a rebel. I thought I was smarter than everyone. I told teachers I thought that I was very anti-authority. Um, I believed I knew best, and if I didn't get that support from my grandfather, aunts, uncles, I have no idea what path I would have been on.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was that for me It really made it clear um, the type of folks that I would be best fit to help
Yeah.
in this
Yeah.
world.
So how was then college for you?
So I went to Bloomsburg. I don't know if you're familiar with Bloomsburg. It's in about an hour east of Penn State. It's a small, a medium-sized liberal arts school. I went off to college and was a biochemistry major. Went through all of that. I said, I don't know if this, I don't want to do a PhD. Just wasn't, I wasn't into the lab stuff. I wanted to do, I wanted applied science, right? Played football on the team, got a scholarship. Um, it was amazing.
What position did you play?
So I played offensive line.
Okay.
I played tight end, I played guard, tackle. I was kind of like the utility player. But that's kind of where a lot of you talk about the beam. I know all about it. The religiosity of sports. I know it. I knew it. That has been something that I have been thinking about since I was 18.
Hmm.
This is an arena for worship. Like,
Yeah.
like because in the Seventh-day Adventist Church, we learned all about the tabernacle
Yeah.
and all of the, I know but it was a huge focus of like this is a representation of the temple in heaven, and this is the process for repentance
Yep.
and scapegoat
Yep.
and the Ark of the Covenant
Yeah.
and all of that. And I'm like, oh, this is this is where I don't know if people are coming to do that, but they're definitely coming to feel better about themselves. It's something like that,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And for me, as an agent in that arena,
Yeah.
playing and then watching, it was so it was so obvious to me the trajectory that people could be put on, not as agents in the arena, but also the people watching, those that are playing. And I mean, culturally, what sports have become, again, goes back to like, what is civilization? What are we doing
Yeah.
here?
Yeah.
Rome, right?
Yeah.
It's also it all was connected to me. So in college, I'm the guy who's there, but and hanging out, but I'm like, guys, and it was rougher. And I loved a lot of people in sports are jokesters. That's the idea. Um, they're very quick-witted folks, really, but not in a um, more um, they're folks who many times to generalize are very um, um, they're how do I describe this? Um, very quick-witted in a way that's and rough. It's rough, especially football. It's rough.
Yep. Yep.
So it's like, oh, this is great. Like you get to play. It's rough play. All this stuff Peterson's talking about all the
Yeah.
time.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm like, oh, I know that toxic. I've seen it in a toxic way, and I've seen the spectrum. So it's
Yep.
like the concept of like what manhood is and what family is and um what people are looking for in life. It was all something that I've been managing all throughout, and I think I got to a point in college because I mean, college is like I said, I was always kind of the one against the hey, like, I don't think this is the. I mean, but it was hey, I was studying, playing football, and my friends were in communication and business, and I don't know what else, and they're just partying all the time.
That's right.
All the
They
time.
had the easy classes.
Yeah. And so it was great though, because I got to learn a lot about people from I mean, we had a lot of kids from Philly on our team. And so I had an amazing opportunity to support. They're like, hey, Smitty, like everyone called me Smitty. Smitty, how do you study? And I was like, what do you mean? They're like, listen, man, they just passed us, in high, like I went to Bishop so and so, and they just passed us that we got a scholarship. I went to, Cardinal this, and that's the idea. We went to these schools and they just passed us, and like and they were guys. They
Yeah.
weren't they were smart guys. And I was like, oh no, you guys can do this. I was like, you just need to learn how to So I taught them how to study. And it was like, okay, like teaching might be something, and well, so that was a great experience, but overall, I kind of just got sick of that like lifestyle. And I think for me, that's when I was like, I want something different. I always have had this strong belief in the gospel, but I've never been immersed in an environment like that, and I wanted to be.
Yeah.
So that's what brought me all the way out here.
Yeah.
Um, I applied to one school and got in, and that was it. And
Wow.
I just kind of said, I want to figure out how to. I just saw my grandfather, he really truly believed in the concept that like he is a steward of everything he has, like it was so apparent to me that he didn't retirement, he didn't care. He was 80 years old, walking into people's houses, doing Bible studies with them, working, helping them with their day-to-day issues. He didn't want to retire to go off somewhere. Like he just really believed, and nothing wrong with going to Florida and retiring, right? But I saw that and I saw how fulfilled he was
Yeah.
and how fulfilled he made others,
Yeah.
that I just like this is what life is. This is like the best part of life.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I want to have it more, I want it more abundantly,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
I want
Yeah.
that more. And so I want to find people that I can live that life with.
Yeah.
So then we get back to the beginning of our conversation, and that's the
Yeah.
that story.
Yeah. How'd you meet Brian at school?
Brian, yeah, we were in class, like we were both in pharmacy, which was weird because neither of us were similar to other people in pharmacy. Everyone thought I was in physical therapy or medicine. They're like pharmacy. Oh, okay. Like they always forgot I was in pharmacy. Brian was up on stage singing half the time. People thought he was like a celebrity.
He's, he's,
And
he's like that.
they thought the church was paying him for the first year he was there. They're like, "Hey, are you the guest speaker? That the church pays?" He's like, "Oh no, I'm in pharmacy school." So we were like these two like misfits in our own place, and he wasn't an athlete. He came from doing music and singing in the choir and then doing band, and like we were in two different spaces. But it's like what C.S. Lewis said. It's like friendship is when you see the horizon
Yeah.
and you look out and you say, "You too."
Yeah.
That was it. It was like, "Oh, you too." We both came from these spaces where we felt different, and then we're like, "Oh, like this." We found someone that we can do life with,
Yeah.
in that way. So that's how we met, and then it was just we actually started to that's when I mentioned we started to get into. We used to wake up at 5 in the morning and like read Nehemiah, rebuilding the temple, like we were just, we lived like in the same dorm, like we didn't live in the same dorm, but in the room, but like those apartments, we lived like a few doors down, we hung out all the time. And and he has a story too, of course.
I'm sure we'll do a Randos with Brian. I have no doubt that's going to happen. I very much want to. So it'll come. And those of you who are curious, you can already find him on the Freddie and Paul show. He's been on 2 episodes. Freddie has his number.
Yeah, it was crazy. He told me that he walked in and Freddie was the first person there. And he was like, "Freddie, I've seen you around." He's like, "Who are you?" And he's like, "Oh, I'm this guy. I'm on YouTube and I've seen this." And so yeah, a guy actually introduced me and Brian to your channel, and that's how, many of our conversations talking about the contemporary culture have come from, this space and just um and so for me it's like language has never been my forte.
Yeah.
Um so it took me long enough to learn medical terminology. So like coming with you guys, I'm like, oh, there's a whole nother world of um terminology when it comes to like you talk about modernism, postmodernism, Like, so I'm always having to be like, okay, what are we defining exactly? So at this time, I may not be the most interesting conversational partner as it pertains to those things, but I think if someone can define for me certain things, I because that's what happens. Like people are talking, and like, oh, this is where I think about this all the time. I just don't know what it's called. I don't know what terms, and that's why and so, oh, also, by the way, a lot of the books you've been talking about, I've read them. Um, the Paul book, both of them actually, both Paul books.
Oh, really? Even
Both
the
of them.
even the F.F. Bruce Paul book.
Yeah,
Wow. It's a good
yeah,
book.
it is. It's a very good, and I love the different ways they approach the
Yeah.
topic.
Yeah.
One's chronological and the other's more thematic.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, and then Dominion, I actually finished that this. I'm the worst. I can tell you that this is something I struggle with. Maybe it's because I'm extroverted or something, and maybe because some of the patterns I see that I don't I don't know if they seem so. So for example, I'll read like a chapter of something, and I'll be like, oh, I feel like I know where this is going, and then I put the book down and I stop, and then I'm like, and then I say, oh, maybe I should keep reading, and then I read, and then I'm just not disciplined with it, and then it's always interesting because like when I finished this Dominion book, the last chapter I was like, oh, the conclusion. I was like, I could have written I could have written it, but like I highlighted the whole last chapter. I was like, yeah, this is it. Like
Yeah.
this is the point. This is like this is how baked in, and that's what I was trying to say to my friends. And I'm like, guys, we're so baked into this Christianity thing. We're all whatever we're doing in sports, whatever we're doing in celebrations, we're all looking for something, and it's gonna and everything that we do, because people are like, well, why is this wrong? Why is this right? And it's like, well, that's not the point. The point is it comes from somewhere, and you can't dismiss where it comes from, and and so I just saw a lot of intellectual dishonesty when I have conversations with people. I'm like, so this book, I'm like, oh yeah, this makes sense. This is how we've come to just accept that things are right and wrong.
Yeah.
Things are just right and wrong in our society because of this. But then people don't believe in Christianity, and it's like, oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
And I've always thought about that, always. And then when I hear you talking about, it, I'm like, oh, and then you're like holding up this book. I'm like, I need to read this book. And it's been really helpful for me because I need to learn history. That's for me, where I'm like, oh, I need to learn history. That's what I'm missing because I don't know the history like that. I know history like biblical history, but I don't know the 30 AD to the,
Yeah.
so I know the Protestant Reformation and I know
Yeah.
after,
Yeah. Yeah.
but
You got the
before,
disciples, you got the Protestant Reformation, and then you got whatever the history is of your little Protestant corner of the world. That's
yes.
right. So it was for the Christian Reformed Church, the disciples, Protestant Reformation, Luther, Calvin, and then um Dutchness. And
Yeah.
off we went.
And that's the funny thing that I'm appreciating is like, oh, the Protestantism became in many ways cultural at some point
Yeah.
or ethnic even.
Yes.
And
Yes.
then like, well, we're going to and like you had a video even last week about, oh, it was the end of Romans. Like, well, this is how we pick and choose what we believe based on some of these recommendations by Paul. We're trying to figure out, like you said, well, do we go to church? Do we go out to eat on the Sabbath? Like, what are we doing exactly, right? And some cultures, well, may have been eating certain foods and it had been okay, and so well, those things got kind of, wiped out of it. Like all of these things end up forming these Protestant groups, and I think it's kind of I just can't imagine that we're all separated. I think I really struggle with that.
Yeah.
That's like the thing that I'm like, I can't imagine based on the book, like Paul's writings, like how did we become like this,
Yeah. Yeah.
truly.
Well, the world was not as, I mean, you're in Southern California, I'm in Sacramento, we're talking live. I mean, this is a, when I went to college, I didn't call my parents because long distance was expensive.
Yeah,
So I wrote letters to my parents. And today, that's like, I Zoom with my family every week.
yeah,
My family on the other coast. When my great grandparents came from the Netherlands to America, they they didn't have, they visited once in their life back, no, my great grandparents, they never visited back there. My grandparents were able to visit back there once where their parents came from. We live in a completely different world. And when you look at the Christian Reformed Church, the Seventh day Adventists, you look at all these little Protestant groups, it was a different world. You were living in your own little pool in some
yeah,
ways. Now there are interconnected pools, but they're kind of your own pool because people did need, I mean, these numbers are created by our capacity for relationships. And
yeah,
so then technology kind of comes in there and plays with those numbers. But what we're living in now is a completely different world. And then, even the homeless stuff that we talked about at the beginning. I mean, you can look at Hoovervilles in the during the Great Depression. But that's still a very different thing than what we're dealing with now. And you look at um you say, okay, drug addiction. Well, where did that come from? Well, you had opium dens and you had alcohol and you had alcoholics, but um fentanyl? There was no such thing as fentanyl. And fentanyl just, I mean, you're a pharmacist, so you know this stuff. I mean, fentanyl, holy cow, Oxycontin. Um,
levels, yeah.
yeah. And those details are significant.
Mhm.
And so, and even heroin. And so in the 1970s, when heroin sort of ripped through the American urban scene, well, that changed, the mission work that my father was doing. And then the church is sort of mobilized for heroin. And then I grow up knowing heroin addicts who are in church with us, who are trying to get straight. And I mean, it's just, the world is interconnected, but it's at the same time we have to have little segments. And so now we have this little corner of the internet, which is, it's not really a denomination, but denominations aren't what they used to be either anymore.
No, but that's the thing I appreciate about the little corner is that it's kind of like I think it's I think it's hard for people who are in the denominations and in Catholicism, like all of these, or to like you said it in your recent video talking about Jordan Peterson's wife and her conversion to Catholicism. It's like, can we just figure out what matters? And I think that is where the little corner actually gives people a taste of that, who
Mm,
are in all of these denominations, who are mostly telling them their parishioners that well everything that we do matters. All of our doctrines are ultimate, you know? And it's like, but if everyone's saying that, then you create tribalism, and then people think people are saved and people aren't saved, or uh, it, it. I think that's what I truly believe that that's what this space can do for the faith community. I really believe that because I don't see how people get along on the surface, but then when people start talking about what they believe, it's like things blow up, nuclear bombs go off, and people never talk to each other again because so and so worships on one day or the other, or eats this
yeah.
and eats that. And I'm like, man, when you're working with homeless people, you you really learn what matters. Like true, like that's what I'm saying. I'm like, oh, everyone's living in a society where, like you said, like, oh, well, like I have access, I live in a house, like it's temperature controlled, and now we have all of this audacity to talk about these things that we think are ultimate. It's like, well, what about like how have we become so needless in our society where we start talking about things that just make us all feel more alone?
Yeah.
They make us disunified in community.
Yeah.
And so that's where when I work with folks I work with, it really gives me perspective too, because um, I believe certain things, and have reasons for them, and other people do too. And working with those folks have humbled me as a young adult to say, oh, okay, like what matters? And I hear you talking about that a lot, and I hear you, kind of, I don't know, just like why step into a culture war of all of these faith? Like why? It's like it just seems counterintuitive to me. And so by the way, I've also appreciated that about the way you approach all of these conversations with all these people, whether they're randos or whether they're people you know. Um, I see that as extremely valuable because the world doesn't need one more tribalist. Like seriously, it really doesn't.
You're
Doesn't need
out
it.
of the TLC. No,
Yeah,
sorry. We have no place for you.
get them out. Exactly. Exactly. So that's been really cool to see. It's been really cool to see over the years. So I think that this conversation was it's funny, there's so many things that I think about on a regular basis as it pertains to the content you put out and the content there's so many things, but I'm glad that I got a chance to share more about you, or sorry, about me, because I do, I mean, by virtue of whatever this is, like you're saying, I know a lot more about you than you know about me,
Yeah. Yeah.
by virtue of hearing you talk and hearing how you process. And
Yeah.
so I'm glad to have the opportunity to share, where I come from and what motivates me and how I see the TLC as an extremely valuable part of the faith community, even though I don't engage with it that much, you know?
Yeah. Well, that's really helpful because lately you know, there's been sort of an effort to get people out of lurkerdom. And it's like, and I always kind of want to tell people there's a lot of people doing really important things. And it might be running a homeless shelter in Victorville, or it might just be taking care of their kids, or it might be for some whole other reasons why they can't sort of, stick their head up over the parapet. They just have to sort of stay underneath and just leave them there. They're all right.
Yeah.
Let them listen, let them watch. That's all right.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I was coming from when we chatted briefly on the phone. Was like literally during the weekday, I'm in the thick of all of this all the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Weekend, I'm hanging out with you know, Paul
Yeah.
Anderson, and Jordan Peterson, and Tim Keller, and I'm away, and I'm like, and actually, my desire for that has made me even consider, doing some type of master's in something because I really gravitate towards the material. I mean, I love, um, I love philosophy and theology and the patterns. And I read books about like I'm reading a book called The Moral Vision of the New Testament, like ethics, like
Oh,
what
it's a good book. Yeah.
book?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm again, I started chapter two, one or two, and I'm slowly working my way through it. I'll get through it eventually, but it's like those kind of works. I think that the application of such things is getting more and more difficult
Yeah.
as we and I'm like, okay, well, Paul Vanderklay is, maybe 60. Folks are getting old, and I mean that in a like who's up next,
Yeah. Yeah.
what am I supposed to be preparing for in light of my resonance with this space,
Yeah. Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
the posture I'm having, and in terms, Tim Keller died, right? Like I
Yeah.
was like, man, I was listening to that guy like, all the time, and it's like, man, this is really about, and then I'm like, okay, people built cathedrals over 300 years. So I'm like, so people ask, hey, what's your vision for Symba Center? I'm like, I'm building a cathedral. I'm creating a 300-year plan. I'm not going to see the thing that I want to see, but I want to make sure that we get a step closer.
Yeah.
That's always been my um, mapping internally, is like very future oriented. Um, and I think, like you're saying, folks are, um, but like that all these crises are just mounting up for a variety of reasons.
Yeah.
Meaning crisis,
Yeah.
homelessness crisis. I
Yeah.
mean, so what I'm trying to do is say, okay, well, how can our organization prepare for the next problem
Yeah.
and prevent the next problem?
Yeah.
And so that's where I'm at. And like where my folks right now are, they're in the space. And right now I'm talking to Paul Vanderclay because I'm thinking about what's the next problem. And that's where for me, I'm definitely looking for mentorship in that. Um, you know, there's a it's like there's a we have an organization that it's like, well, where do we want to take things and what do we want to do and what's where can we see, the next problem that maybe homelessness causes?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
no one's thinking about that. People just
No.
throw the current problem, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I value your insight, and hopefully that can be a primer for future conversations. Because it's like, man, as you're dealing with all of you're in people's stories every day,
Yeah.
and you're seeing it. So, um,
Did you watch the conversation I had with Andy Wilkins?
I don't think so.
You want to look that one up.
Okay.
So I was at the Ian McGilchrist event when I was in London. Tayo brought me to that
Okay.
and bumped into some other people there.
Cool.
And he saw me there. He said, recognized me by the back of my head. He'd been watching my video. So he came up to me. He does basically, he's a consultant on healthcare policy
Mhm.
at a very, very high level, governmental levels in Europe. And so, he might be an interesting person for you to connect with
Yeah.
because he's asking, I knew when I brought him on the channel, it's like, well, how does this fit with everything else? Why not? Let's put it on anyway.
Yeah.
And but it's many of those issues that they're dealing with when we were talking about the fact that, and actually Jacob Federecci also talks about many of these things too. Um, the insurance companies are wising up and governments are wising up because they're looking at this underclass that we have, a growing underclass, and they're saying the sort of the indirect routes of trying to help are really costly. And there might be some alternative ways of actually having better outcomes, which don't seem so direct to people because one of the things that, as you well know, when you sit down and you talk to people, and it's in your own life. I mean, so often part of the problem that's been happening in our culture is that governments have been in competition with families when actually families have long been the first line of defense, and in many cases, the healthiest remedy, not a perfect remedy, but a healthier remedy than the institutionalization of massive numbers of people. Because when you put 170 people in a big box, dynamics and spirits will develop because they're people. And actually, if you have other little things like families and churches where there are not sort of technical scientifically based relationships with which by definition are supposed to be univariable, but are sort of multivariable and organic, there's actually a lot of healing that goes on with that. And if it had not been for your grandfather and his story, I mean, this whole chain of events that leads to Symba and Victorville and you and Brian and all of this never would have happened.
Yep.
And so often this sort of scientific view and institutional approach that we have as a culture is self-defeating. And so Andy, I think and many others are really looking at a very high level, asking some basic questions. And these people have seats of influence and saying, okay, so, we built a really wonderful state-of-the-art, basically acute crisis center that we can, okay, they've got drugs in their system, they're hungry, they need health care. And I've seen this again and again with homeless people. ERs and hospitals and medical institutions are really good at taking a human being whose body is in trauma because they filled it full of drugs and other things. And so, okay, we got you stable now. All right. And I will tell you, so often I have been, so the cycle goes, okay, know this homeless person. They've now got into crisis where they might die on the street. So then, okay, you're going to get in my car. I'm going to drive you to the ER. You're going to go in the ER. They're going to get this crap out of your body. They're going to get the proper psych meds in. So your bipolar is now sort of stabilized. They're going to get, a week or two of good diet in your body. And so then they show up back at, there was one day, the guy, it was just the cycle. I've run through the cycle so many times with this guy. He's fresh out of the hospital. He's wearing new clothes. He's, his psych meds are in. And he comes to me and he says, I got a bag of weed in my pocket. I have a beer in my hand, and I have a crack whore in the mattress behind the store. And it's like, I've been in the hospital for 3 months, and I just want to get drunk, a little high, and get laid. And I just thought, oh, back into the cycle we go. And again, 4 or 5 days later, he's back at my office. Pastor, I don't feel so good. Really? And so I'm driving him to the ER or to the psych hospital again. And he says to me, Pastor, why is it always you driving me to the hospital and me never driving you? Well, let's get into this, shall we?
Yeah, that's
Let's
for
see.
fun. Yeah.
You told me that you had 14 DUIs before you finally gave up on a driver's license. Where is your car you're going to drive me to the hospital in? And wasn't it just a few weeks ago that you were at my door bragging about the fact that you had your beer and your bag of pot and the crack whore in the mattress already waiting for you? I mean, so, but again, for him, knowing him as I knew him, there's just a long story. And I remember talking to him once. I said, when's the first time you had a drink? I was 13-year-old, and he told me the story. When's the first time you smoked pot? I was 15 years old, and he told me the story. He came from a great home, a religious home. And, so the truth is that we human beings are so complex, and that the medical can be really good about, okay, we got this crap out of your body. We've got your psych meds. Okay. For the first time, maybe in months, I can sit down and have a conversation with you that actually makes a degree of sense, where I don't have to do all the heavy lifting in this conversation. Okay. Where shall we go from here? And that answer always involves community. It always involves community, structure, all of these things that institutions really don't have difficulty addressing. Communal institutions like a church can help, but that's sort of a different animal than a hospital. So you know this. I'm preaching to the choir here, but
You're bringing up a great point about what are we w- in America? We have made, like I brought it up earlier. People retire to Florida. I can make the case that that's pretty bad for families,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
So I think it wasn't wrong, but like I have a pretty strong opinion. I think it's bad for families. Is that I say it's not wrong because it's like, well, that's one of probably 1,000 things that we're doing normally in our society that we don't have any idea the detriment it has on our families.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like having my grandfather in my life, I can't even, like you're saying, the community, the wisdom, the hey, what was it like back then and what happened then? And it gave me so much perspective on life, so much.
Yeah.
Where people are like, well, how do you know? I'm like, well, I don't know. I asked my grandpa. He was like 90, you know? It's like I asked him what was going on. And he told me his perspective. And it might not be what happened, but I can glean from his perspective what was going on. And it, it's it's that community that I think that in many ways our society makes it very easy to choose other things
Yeah.
at the top of the dominance hierarchy.
Yeah.
Hey, well, so and so is doing this and so is doing that, and little by little we're being pulled away from the very thing that makes a home.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's
Yeah. Yeah.
where we have houses but no homes,
Yeah.
you know, and and then like you said, the medical situation and the medical institutions are made and built for a specific purpose.
Yep. Yep.
But
Yep.
now, because we've lost all these other things in society that are helping build that cocoon, that bubble that keeps us sane, safe, and sober, you
Yeah.
know, like those three things, um, like, like they're now asked to do all this stuff.
Yeah.
And now me as a like people are like, wait, you're the pharmacist and you do what? I'm like, yeah, I don't really practice as a pharmacist anymore. I kind of do this. And they're like, wait, but now medical and housing is connected. I'm like, yeah, you know, and it's like I have to go through hoops to describe how it's all interconnected and how the medical complex has found a way to be the one to solve it. I'm
Yeah.
like, it's just so far from ideal.
Yeah.
And that is, I think, at the back, that is the backbone. That is like the foundation of our problem.
Yeah.
And homelessness is just one of those things. It's like the worst outcome
Right.
of that. But
Yep.
many people are suffering in loneliness, in addiction to pornography. I mean, sex is becoming a
A
commodity
drug.
drug.
It's sex
It,
has become a drug. Yeah.
like, and then kids have like the phones. I mean, we could go into so many things, but
Yeah.
I don't mean to sound like someone who was born in the 1900s, but in many ways, I saw what simplicity and a good life look like, and it's like I don't know how we're going to get back to that
Yeah.
in this context, and I think that churches, um, and folks that have this at the top of mind need to be creating some type of like hey, well, here's a proposal for how we could develop a more disciplined, family-centered life.
Yep.
And I think if it doesn't come from the church, people will accept it more. But like we know in Dominion, it all comes from the cross.
Yeah. Yeah. We're gonna launder some of this stuff. We're gonna launder it. We're gonna,
Exactly.
here's a homeless center built by the city. No religion here. Don't worry. It'll be all right.
But
AA learned how to launder it.
yes, but then we pray before the ribbon cutting,
Oh,
and I say yes.
yeah.
And there's a prayer before the city council meetings, and that is still very much a part of who we are.
Well, that's in Victorville. I doubt it's in LA.
I don't know. I can't say.
I bet you it isn't. I bet you it isn't.
Yeah.
Well, Shawn, this has been a pleasure. You're gonna let me share this, right?
Yeah, if you think it would be good, I'm okay with that.
I think this story, I think your story, and I think the story of what you and Brian have done is going to bring hope and healing to people. I really do. So,
I appreciate that. I wasn't sure, because I'm okay with the personal stuff, but I wasn't sure, if it would be, if it would be, if you'd be okay with that, and some of the insights that I was sharing about my appreciation for you and the work that you're doing as well. Um,
yeah, I'll edit that. I'll edit that out. So
okay, yeah, well, that's good to know. Now so that's the thing too.
I won't. I'm just gonna let it play. I hate editing.
I'm
I
okay
have to
with
throw the whole darn thing on the internet.
I'm okay
And
with it.
if I
I'll,
ever had a manager for this channel, he'd be like, "Okay, now we're gonna start editing, and we're gonna, you know how it would look." But anyway,
Yeah, but I'm okay. I'm okay with it. I just I would also be nice to have a candid conversation. Not that it wasn't candid. I definitely was, but I think that the work that you're doing, I see it. I think I see it, and the intentionality doesn't go without notice, and I think that there's a lot of strings that you're pulling on that are really really helping to fill the gaps that people have in their own spiritual life. And um, it's only because of some other people, maybe public figures, that I see it, and that's why it gets a little. But I agree on many fronts, regarding various folks, and it's good though, because yeah, who's shepherding the shepherds?
yeah, yeah,
Like that's what it comes down to.
yeah.
So
Well, Jesus is. He just has
yeah,
a lot of. He
yeah,
just has a lot of. Just has a lot of covert workers who are sneaking around doing it where nobody's looking.
yeah. Beautiful thing.
No, no religion here. Nope, nope.
Yeah, that's right. No religion here.
No religion here. It's all safe.
Yeah,
Well, we will definitely have to talk again. And if you ever if you ever make the trip up here too with your coworker,
I'd like to. Yeah,
it would be great. It would be great. And I hopefully I do travel around the state of California, and I would if I ever get near Victorville, I'll definitely want to
yeah.
take a little peek and give you guys a shout. In fact, I'm coming down next week. I'm coming down for a meeting. I will have a rental car. I'll have to see the way my schedule goes, and I'm
Okay.
flying in and out of Ontario. So
Well, I live. So I don't live in Victorville. I live in like Rancho Cucamonga, Fontana. So that's like 15 minutes from Ontario. So
oh, okay. So maybe we'll see. I got your number, and then maybe when I get down there next week we can get together. That'd be great. Because I'd love to see what you guys are doing. And I mean,
yeah,
Brian, oh gosh, Brian, that guy's going to run the world someday. He came into this church, and he very quickly, everybody knew his name and loved him. And then when he came back, it's like, boy, he's already, everybody looks at him. He's already an old friend to people here. So
yeah,
very charismatic guy.
there.
So, all right. Well, maybe I'll see you next week then, Shawn. That would be great.
Let me know.
All right.
All
Take
right.
care.
Yeah, you too. Thank
Bye
you.
bye.
Bye.